I mean, first, the emphasis on shared values, I think it's incredibly important. For many of my British, French friends, the entire EU debate was a primarily financial, economic debate. For us, those of us who come from the periphery of Europe, for us it's mainly a debate on shared values and the danger of losing those shared values. And the importance of having a supranational umbrella that brings people from different backgrounds around shared values, to me, is very important. I do not think that nationalism of any kind can be inclusive. And we have to make a difference there between maybe nationalism and patriotism. It is perfectly okay, understandable, and beautiful for us to have emotional attachments to the cultures, lands, families where we come from. But nationalism as an ideology is a very dangerous thing. And again, people coming from Turkey, the Middle East, the Balkans, we have seen the dangers of all of that. With regards to populism, populists are not the reason why we are in this mess. They are there because there has been a mess in the first place. So it is the outcome of democracy in trouble. It is the outcome of a crisis. We do have a crisis that we need to talk about. And I do not think that that crisis can solely be understood by looking at economic or financial inequality. By no means, I'm not belittling, underestimating the importance of economic gaps, but we need to talk about other things as well, particularly emotions, which has been so underestimated in mainstream political theory. But I do believe that this is the age of anxiety, angst, anger. It is perfectly understandable for people to worry whether their children are going to find a job. You know, it's perfectly understandable that the people are worried that, yes, there will be too many refugees, and to be worried about terrorism. If we do not allow them to speak their anxiety, to talk about it, if we don't have open spaces and judge them on the basis of their emotions, I think we will be pushing them towards the far right. To me, it's very interesting to see. Okay. Let's go back a few years. We had the Arab Spring, we had the financial crisis, we had the Euro crisis, Brexit, Trump. Many times, including the polls, the experts got things wrong. We need to talk about these things. How is it possible? But where we are right now is many populist demagogues, and I think we need to use this word, they are saying to the people, you know what? These people, the elite, they're always getting it wrong. And you are the pure people. You just need to trust your guts, your instincts. You don't need these intellectuals. Yeah. So the denigration of the intellect, to me, is a very dangerous trend. One more thing I want to add.
No, we've got lots of time, because we must move it on. You will have.
So we're going to get to Douglas Murray's response to Elif's basically, her comments about populism and nationalism, and her basically stance is that, and patriotism. Her basic stance, the way I believe it, is that I feel she's saying nationalism. She's sort of linking it to National Socialist Party. What happened in Germany, what happened in other, countries in Europe when world wars, broke out, and what did the nationalists do? They cracked down on people. They utilized the power of the state, the tyranny of the state. They galvanized the media complex. They galvanized, every entity that they could, police force, army, navy, security force, whatever it is, and they cracked down on the people. And she's trying to make a distinction between nationalism and patriotism and then populism. And then she brings in the populist movements, like Brexit was populist and Trump was populist. And she says this is coming, she doesn't believe that it's coming from an economic place. She believes it's coming from a shared values place or a tribalistic place. And I just like to say that in the United States of America, and I certainly think in the UK, Brexit, was brought about in the United States, okay, that the men and women, the forgotten men and women for the last decades or so, in terms of wages, in terms of economic stagnation, in terms of not, wages basically, either depressed or not going up at all for decades. And everybody promising, every party saying, we're going to do this. Every politician says, we're going to bring you jobs. We're going to take you in the 21st century. There's going to be, $100,000 jobs for everybody out there. Just not happening, folks. Just not happening. Anyways, we're going to get to Douglas Murray in just a second. But before we do that, just want to let you know you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir. We welcome you one and all, where I basically give my political prescription of my basically, political persuasion, and where I basically try to share with you what happens when social media, culture, Hollywood, entertainment, science, all collide. Let's get to Douglas Murray's response right now.
We've talked about populism and what might be driving that and what might define it. But Douglas, I know you wanted to get on the other thing, but if you can, let's pivot to this issue. And everyone is asking themselves the same question, which is what is causing this? And is this something that is merely visited upon Europe? Or is this something that on some level has been caused by decisions Europe and Europeans have taken?
Well, firstly, let me just say that there is a narrative, we've heard a little bit of it so far, that the publics of Europe are being led astray by talented demagogues. It's possible as well that the publics of Europe have seen a political class fail to get a grasp of very major things or even talk about them, and that the public have noticed facts. And that it's not that there's a meta-narrative that's going around. There are just facts. There are things that we can see with our eyes. There are things that are clear to us, which politicians daren't tread on. And I've had this experience throughout throughout my life. I never forget the time, many years ago, I think when France first banned the headscarf. I've told this story before, of a Labour MP in a studio with me discussing the rights and wrongs of this, and spent the whole time with me. An Iranian friend of mine was also there, explaining why we were fascist and Islamophobic and so on for defending the French Republic's verdict on the headscarf. And we came out, and this Labour MP patted me on the back and said, "Never forget, Douglas, we're all with you." And I said, "Well, what was that all about on air?" Which was the more pertinent moment. And he said, "Look, I've got a large Muslim constituency and I can't do anything in this area." And that's what you hear all the time in private. And the politicians, when I say this to them, their eyes go huge. They daren't tread onto this. But there's a very straightforward fact, I'm afraid, on this terrorism thing that has to be confronted. Extremism and violence can come from absolutely any community, pretty much. I mean, even Buddhists, when riled up in certain parts of the world, can become violent. The Quakers, I think, we can't go for. But pretty much every community. So I accept that. This is not something to be picked up on. But Islamic extremism only comes from the Islamic religion and from followers of it. And that is an imported problem for Europe. That's a problem that we've brought in and we're now facing. Now, none of our politicians, by the way, and there's no great conspiracy about this, nobody expected it. If you just said to a politician in the 1990s, in the early years of the 2000s, Europe is going to be racked by blasphemy debates, they'd say, "What are you talking about? When did the Spanish Inquisition return?" And then we all became used to it, that there were certain things you couldn't do that were actually blasphemy in a country like this and were punishable effectively by death, by a death sentence. We all accepted that. And now we're told we have to accept the terrorism. Well, maybe we do have to accept the terrorism as part of our life, but the publics have a right to be looking at the politicians and saying, "Look, this is a problem you brought in."
Yes.
It's not only to be talked about. It's not only to be talked about as a problem, but unless we're willing to do that bit of identifying, to my mind, the gap between what the public can see and what the public know, and what the political class is even willing to whisper, will continue to grow, and that's the gap where you have to worry.
So once again, Douglas Murray hitting it right out of the park, folks. Unbelievable. And all I'd like to add to this is that what Douglas was basically saying is that time after time after time after time after time, the political class, the elites, what I call the country club class, looking down upon the country class, looking down over flyover country, in between the coast, so to speak, in the United States of America. and that the lady Elfie from Turkey, where she was basically saying, "Oh, it's a populist. It's a populist guy," and he's basically saying, "Oh, your troubles, you know better. You know better, general population. Oh, all you serfs, vassals, peons, you average, ordinary folks. Your gut's not, your gut. I mean, your gut's right. Trust your gut. It's those elitists out there. They don't know what they're talking about. They've been wrong time and time again." And that's so true. And that's all Douglas is saying. We know when people have a common sense if you use your freaking brain. You'll know exactly when something is right and you'll know exactly when something is wrong. There's something inside of you that tells you, folks, unless you're completely retarded. You're a complete moron. You're a complete imbecile. You know something's there that says, that's just not right. But they're pushing for it. But that just doesn't seem right. And that's all Doug is saying, is that politicians don't want to listen to the classes, don't want to listen to the masses, but they're listening to the upper classes. That's when you get people that come out and say, "Hey, look, they just pointed out." And then to demagogue those people, they say, "That's a populist. That's a populist movement. That's what populism is about." And then the connotations come with that, as we talked about before. You're racist, you're bigoted, you're homophobic, Islamophobic. All the phobes, come out. Basically, that's what's there. Anyways, let's listen to what one of the ladies from the Netherlands, I believe, let's see her rebuttal to this.
Another comment. I'm not disputing Douglas this time around.
I want to hear from somebody who does, though. So I'm looking
it's
at
interesting that in France we've had this very critical approach of the British view about multiculturalism, communitarism, which in our vocabulary are really bad words. And there has been a great deal of French self-delusion about the idea that our secular culture would actually integrate rather than assimilate, and that indeed our...
Just wanted to say, I made a mistake, not from the Netherlands. This lady is from, I believe, from France.
A second or third generation of immigrants coming from former colonies, which is also the case, I believe, in this country, would naturally believe that Astérix or Vercingétorix was their ancestors and that our education system would transform them. It has worked to a point, especially with girls, better so than with young men. But we have discovered, and indeed, as we all know, France has been struck by terrorism, homegrown terrorism, French citizens most of the time, as indeed British citizens in this case. And so it shows that for 2 or 3 generations, not only our politicians, but our societies have not really measured the difficulty of giving a proper identity to these people, because it's also a sign of an identity crisis, turning to that kind of ideology. It's not even religion, it's an ideology. And that shows that it is indeed a dimension no one has taken into account. And not only...
Well, just leave it at this, folks. What this lady is talking about is that in France, 2 or 3 or more generations, and they still had homegrown terrorists. And this is the thing that we've talked about in the past, I've talked about in the past, is that how does that happen? Now, yes, you can say, okay, you've got huge levels of immigration, refugees coming in at an unbelievable pace in unbelievable numbers. The other things that happens, folks, is that in terms of economic disparity, these refugees, these immigrants, 99% of them are extremely, extremely poor and very undereducated. Yes, you do have some of the immigrants, some of these refugees, some of these immigrants that do have an education, that have gone and perhaps, done a bachelor's, a master's, maybe a PhD, but they are such a small percentage of the population. Those people, when they land on the shores of Europe, will probably be able to get a job that will allow them to at least get a place to live in a better part, rather than these ghettos or tenement towns that form in European cities and countries all over, where anywhere from 20, 30, 40, 50, even upwards of 60, 70% of the population becomes an immigrant population, and that leads to problems of its own. And then there's no assimilation, because everybody that comes to the shores of those countries, instead of dispersing out across the entire country, head towards those areas where their people previously that have come have settled. And that's where they basically go towards. I mean, that would just be, that's what happened when it happened in the United States of America, into New York City, where everybody came. The Italians went to Italian neighborhoods. The Polish people went to the Polish neighborhoods. The Irish settled in the Irish neighborhood. I mean, predominantly, that's what was going on. And that's what happened. But since then, in the United States of America, as immigrants have come in, they've literally gone all over the country now. Not just settling in New York City, obviously, but they've gone all over. And so that type of assimilation has occurred to a greater degree, I would say, in the United States than has happened in Europe. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel, like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out our video links above and below. My final thought, as always, when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.